Eleanor Carter never imagined her life would spiral into a whirlwind of heartbreak, betrayal, and unspeakable survival. One fateful night, cast out on the cold, unforgiving streets, she found herself giving birth in an empty alley with no help in sight. Her millionaire ex-partner, Adrian Davenport, was nowhere to be found. Yet destiny had other plans. Months later they would come face to face again, but this time under the glaring lights of a courtroom, with the relentless echo of a judge's gavel thundering in the background. Prepare for an unforgettable journey entwined with secrets, scandals, and a relentless quest for justice that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Elena Carter had grown accustomed to the noises of the city, the taxi horns, distant sirens, and the electric hum of street lamps. But on this particular night, every sound felt amplified. The cold seeped through her tattered coat, chilling her to the bone. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she clutched her swollen belly. She stumbled through the dark alley, breath coming in quick, shallow gasps, searching for any sign of help. Her mind raced with a single, frantic question. Where is Adrian? He had promised to be there for her, to protect her and their unborn child. But as her due date approached, the phone calls stopped and the texts never came. The man who once swore his undying love vanished without a trace. At first, Elena believed he was busy handling the affairs of Davenport Holdings. Adrian was, after all, the youngest heir to a formidable business empire. He spent his days attending endless meetings at the family firm's head office in Chicago's Loop, dining with politicians and rubbing shoulders at exclusive galas. She brushed aside her doubts, clinging to the idea that once his work settled, he would return to her side. But here she was alone in labor, and desperately hoping for a miracle. The contraction hit her with brutal force. Elena collapsed against a graffiti-covered wall, gritting her teeth so hard she feared they might crack. She had no phone. She had no one to call. She'd pawned her last valuable possession, her mother's locket, just to afford a few nights at a run-down motel. But now even that was gone. She looked up and down the deserted alley, praying someone might pass by. Her pleas were swallowed by the roar of an approaching train overhead. In that suffocating moment, Eleanor realized she would have to deliver her baby by herself. Panic seized her heart, but a fierce maternal instinct also flooded her veins. She forced herself to breathe, to remember the techniques she'd read about months ago. As another contraction racked her body, Eleanor screamed into the darkness. She felt the baby descending, a sensation both terrifying and miraculous. She removed her coat, spreading it on the cold, damp pavement. The city's neon glow illuminated the graffiti around her, and she felt for a fleeting second that this heart-breakingly surreal scene might be the end of her. But she pushed forward, determined to bring her child into the world, no matter the cost. A sudden wave of relief swept over Elena when she heard a faint voice from the mouth of the alley. An elderly man who introduced himself as Mr. Harold James, wearing a threadbare trench coat, had heard her cries. Under normal circumstances, he might have hurried on, fearful of city dangers, but something compelled him to step forward. Crouching beside Elena, he offered nothing more than a few words of encouragement, and trembling hands he admitted he knew next to nothing about childbirth. But in that moment, compassion was all Eleanor needed. With Harold's help, she tore open the hem of her dress to fashion makeshift swaddling cloths. Every nerve in her body felt aflame. She let out a raw, guttural scream. And then finally a new voice joined the night, the piercing cry of her newborn daughter. Elena cradled the tiny infant against her chest, tears mingling with the sweat on her face. Harold rummaged through his pockets, eventually producing a clean handkerchief to gently wipe the baby's face. In the faint glow of a flickering streetlight, Eleanor cast at her child a rush of love, overwhelming the pain and desperation. She whispered a single name: Hope. In the days that followed, Eleanor's world was a fragile balancing act between survival and caring for her newborn. Mr. James, true to his unassuming kindness, led Elena to a makeshift shelter hidden beneath the overpass. The shelter, run by a small non-profit, offered warmth and anonymity. Two things she desperately needed. She tried to contact Adrian, but the line she had for him was constantly busy or disconnected. When she called Davenport Holdings, she was met with polite yet dismissive secretaries who claimed they had never heard of her. During those sleepless nights while cradling hope close, Eleanor wondered what she had done to deserve such abandonment. And yet she clung to a slender thread of optimism. Adrian was a man of ambition, recognized as a wunderkind in the financial world, a graduate of Harvard Business School, a subject of numerous articles in Forbes and The Guardian. He was adored by the public for his philanthropic endeavors and charm. Elena reasoned that the man she knew, gentle caring, couldn't have simply disappeared on purpose. But as she discovered an outdated newspaper article featuring Adrian at the Ritz-Carlton gala with another woman on his arm, her doubts exploded into heartbreak. Had he truly replaced her? Or was there something deeper at play? The shelter manager, Teresa Alvarez, took pity on Elena's plight. She reached out to local charities, including one run by the city's Department of Human Services, in hopes of securing more permanent assistance for Elena and her newborn. The endless forms and administrative hoops felt like navigating a labyrinth. But Elena's determination never wavered. Between feedings, Elena poured every ounce of energy she had into finding work. Most potential employers turned her away the moment they saw her baby in tow. A sympathetic waitress position offered by a local diner was short-lived when Hope developed colic, and Elena's frequent absences to soothe her daughter resulted in abrupt termination. At night, Eleanor often found herself awake, listening to the distant hum of late-night traffic, reliving the sweet memories with Adrian. She remembered the penthouse parties at the Drake Hotel, the spontaneous weekend trips to Napa Valley, and the times he used to whisper promises of a life filled with love and security. How could that same man leave her to fend for herself in the cold streets of Chicago? Desperation fueled her. She wrote letters addressed directly to Adrian's personal penthouse, even slipping one under the doors of Davenport Holdings. Silence remained her only reply. Behind the walls of Davenport Holdings, Adrian's world was equally tumultuous, though in a very different way. After his father's sudden passing from a heart attack, Adrian found himself in the crosshairs of board members, executives, and opportunistic relatives who all questioned whether he had the mettle to steer the Davenport empire. He spent long nights buried in financial reports, ironically unaware that just a few miles away, Eleanor was fighting to keep their newborn daughter fed and warm. Whenever thoughts of Elena surfaced, her radiant smile, her unwavering belief in him, he tried to dismiss them. The memory of their argument, the hurt on her face as he walked out the door, weighed heavily on him. Yet he convinced himself he was doing the right thing by focusing on the business. Meanwhile, Adrian's best friend and personal attorney, Mark Henderson, cautioned him repeatedly. "If Eleanor is pregnant, you need to address it," Mark insisted. Ignoring the possibility could lead to legal trouble down the road. But Adrian, grappling with his own insecurities and illusions of betrayal, brushed aside his friend's concerns. With the entire Davenport board pressuring him to secure a profitable merger, Adrian allowed his personal life to remain an unresolved mystery. Winter arrived mercilessly in Chicago, the sub-zero winds cutting across Lake Michigan and leaving ice crystals in their wake. For Elena and her baby, warmth was a luxury they could seldom afford. Through the nonprofit's coordination, they secured a small room in a halfway house. The cramped space, flaking walls and drafty windows were far from ideal, but Elena found a glimmer of hope in having a door to lock at night. Every morning she dressed Hope in layers of donated clothes before braving the frigid streets to search for work. She handed out resumes at fast food chains, retail stores, and even administrative offices. Most places either ignored her or expressed sympathy before showing her the door. "We'll keep your application on file," they'd say, their eyes betraying a pity she loathed. One fateful day, after trudging through a blizzard, Eleanor collapsed on the sidewalk, her body shaking from exhaustion. A passerby named Patricia Locke, an off-duty social worker, found her and immediately called an ambulance. At Mount Sinai Hospital, doctors discovered severe anemia, dehydration, and signs of malnourishment. For Elena, the hospital bed and the gentle hum of machines offered a fleeting sense of safety. Even if Hope's cries in the nursery reminded her that they still had an uphill battle to fight. While Elena recovered at Mount Sinai, Patricia Locke, the caring social worker who found her, visited every day. She brought small comforts, a cozy blanket for Hope, a set of baby bottles, and offered a compassionate ear. It was Patricia who first gently suggested legal counsel. "Eleanor," Patricia said one afternoon, "you have rights, and so does your daughter. If Adrian Davenport is truly the father, you need to consider seeking child support or any financial help the law might provide." The mention of Adrian's name triggered a wave of conflicting emotions in Eleanor: anger, sorrow, and a glimmer of lingering love. She had been too proud, or perhaps too frightened, to consider legal action before. The mere idea of dragging her once-beloved partner into court felt like another betrayal of her hopes for a reconciled family. But she had to face the reality her baby needed stability, and she was running out of ways to provide it alone. By the time Elena was discharged, Patricia had connected her with a pro bono legal clinic. There, Elena was introduced to Marcia Bradshaw, a determined young attorney with kind eyes who specialized in family law. And with that single step, the trajectory of Elena's world began to shift. Marcia Bradshaw's office was modest, nestled in a worn-out building housing various non-profits. Unlike the gleaming high-rises of Davenport Holdings, the space here was cramped and the elevator often broken. But Elena immediately felt at ease. There was an air of sincerity in Marcia's posture as she gestured for Elena to sit. As Elena recounted her story, Marcia listened intently, scribbling notes on a yellow legal pad. The attorney's brow furrowed when Elena described giving birth alone in an alley, and the subsequent silence from Adrian. "If Adrian Davenport is the father," Marcia said carefully, "we can pursue a paternity test, child support, and potentially more. But you must be prepared for a fight. The Davenports are powerful, and they're not going to roll out a welcome mat." Fear and resolve wrestled within Elena. She cradled hope as the baby fussed her cries, echoing through the cramped room. Elena knew she was venturing into uncharted territory, a world of court documents and depositions, but she no longer had the luxury of choice. Leaving Marcia's office, Elena felt a rush of anxious determination. The protective walls she'd tried to build around her heartbreak were slowly giving way to a new resolve. "I will fight for my daughter's future." The day the official letter arrived at Davenport Holdings was one Adrian would never forget. The engraved envelope bore Marcia Bradshaw's name and the words "Notice of Paternity and Child Support Hearing." Adrian stared at the letter, his mind racing, heart pounding as he read through the legal jargon. He felt a maelstrom of emotions. Anger at the sudden intrusion into his carefully curated life. Guilt for having let things spiral so far, and a strange flicker of relief that at last the question of Elena would be addressed. He remembered how he once imagined proposing to her on a yacht in the Adriatic Sea, how he had envisioned a future of laughter and children running around an estate in Lake Forest. That dream had evaporated into thin air, replaced by board meetings and silent phone calls. Mark Henderson, Adrian's attorney and friend, read the document over his shoulder. "You need to deal with this carefully," Mark warned. "If the test proves the child is yours, you can't ignore it. Not legally, not morally." Without responding, Adrian set the letter aside, fists clenched. He felt cornered and betrayed, yet he couldn't deny an inexplicable ache in his chest. A child. His child. That realization would change everything. Elena's first court hearing was scheduled at the Cook County Circuit Court. The antique architecture of the courthouse, with its towering pillars and hushed halls, made her feel both insignificant and strangely hopeful. She clutched hope tightly, trying to focus on the rhythmic breathing of her baby, rather than the hammering of her own heart. Anxiety pinned her to her seat in the waiting area. She wasn't dressed in designer clothing or accompanied by a legal entourage. All she had was Marcia by her side. She couldn't help but recall the glittering galas she had once attended with Adrian. It seemed surreal that she was now about to face him in a courtroom. When Adrian finally arrived, Elena felt her breath hitch. He looked every bit the polished millionaire-tailored suit, polished shoes, cool confidence. Yet in his eyes, she glimpsed a flicker of something that looked a lot like regret. The hearing was brief. Judge Isaac Moretti, known for his stern demeanor, listened attentively as Marcia outlined the need for an immediate paternity test. Adrian's legal team, led by a seasoned lawyer named Robert King, tried to dismiss the case as a baseless claim. But Judge Moretti ordered the test without hesitation, setting in motion the legal machinery that would forever link their fates. The paternity test results came back positive. Adrian Davenport was indeed Hope's father. The news spread through the corridors of Davenport Holdings like wildfire, fueling office gossip and shaking the family's pristine image. Adrian's stepmother, Lucinda Davenport, practically frothed at the mouth with indignation, convinced Elena was nothing more than a cunning gold digger. Behind closed doors, Adrian's board of directors were not pleased either. The timing could not have been worse. Davenport Holdings was on the cusp of closing a multi-million-dollar deal with Morgan Stanley, and shareholders feared negative press might jeopardize the negotiations. Whispers of damage control echoed in the executive suites, while social media buzzed with rumors, speculation, and paparazzi snapshots. For Elena, the test result was a bittersweet vindication. She had never doubted who Hope's father was, but seeing the official paperwork gave her a momentary surge of courage. Marcia assured her that the next steps formalizing child support, possibly negotiating custody rights, were well within her legal claims. Still, a pang of sadness clung to her. Despite her anger and hurt, a small part of her had yearned for an apology or some show of remorse from Adrian that went beyond mere legal obligation. But for now, the fight had only just begun. As the public eye turned toward the unfolding drama media outlets, scrambled for angles. The Chicago Tribune ran a headline, "Millionaire Heir, Adrian Davenport, in Paternity Scandal." Talk shows, tabloid websites, and social media hashtags proliferated. Meanwhile, Elena found herself fending off reporters who camped outside the shelter, where she sometimes volunteered, eager to snap pictures of her with hope. Marcia advised Elena to maintain privacy and focus on the court proceedings, but the relentless intrusion weighed on her. She worried about how the press would frame her story. She was not a schemer, nor was she some naive girl chasing a wealthy man's fortune. She was simply a mother, fighting for her child's rightful support. Adrian, on the other hand, had spun into a crisis management frenzy. Robert King arranged a discreet meeting with Marcia to gauge the possibility of settling out of court. They proposed a lump sum of money in exchange for full custody, hoping to shield the Davenport name from ongoing scandal. Eleanor was appalled by the suggestion that she might sell her child to a father who had been absent throughout her pregnancy and her daughter's early months. For Elena, the lines were clear. She wanted Adrian to be involved in Hope's life, but not at the cost of being pushed aside like an inconvenience. A crucial turning point arrived when Marcia scheduled a mediation session. The goal was to see if a compromise could be reached without dragging the matter through a drawn-out trial. The sterile conference room in the courthouse felt suffocating, its white walls echoing even the slightest shuffle of papers. Eleanor sat on one side with Marcia. Adrian, flanked by Robert King, occupied the other. The mediator, a soft-spoken woman named Linda Moore, explained the process. "We're here to see if there's a middle ground," she said, her gentle tone attempting to melt the icy tension. Elena expected Adrian to open with a tirade or an accusation. Instead, he surprised her. I never meant for it to get to this," he began haltingly. I thought you'd moved on. I didn't know you were homeless or struggling. If I had known, He trailed off, his eyes flickering with guilt. For a second, Eleanor felt her heart soften. She recalled the tenderness he once showed her, the man who never hesitated to hold her hand in public, who spoke of building a family someday. But then she remembered the labor pains, the cold alley, and the desperate nights. That memory hardened her resolve. A real apology wasn't enough. She needed a sincere commitment to her and Hope's well-being. The mediation session ended without a resolution. Adrian insisted he wanted to be part of Hope's life, but Robert King recommended that Elena relinquish physical custody in exchange for generous financial compensation. Elena stood firm, refusing to let Adrian come and go at will, without shouldering true parental responsibility. Outside the courthouse, media photographers snapped pictures capturing the tension etched on Elena's face and the discomfort in Adrian's posture. Headlines spun wildly: heirs, love child, sparks. Heated custody battle. Mother of Davenport. Baby rejects lavish settlement. Elena returned to her cramped room that night, emotionally drained. Though she believed she was making the right choices for Hope, fear gnawed at her. She worried about the financial might of the Davenport family, their ability to drag her through an endless legal process. Would she be forced into a settlement just to keep her daughter secure? After putting Hope to sleep, Elena found a quiet moment to look through old photographs. She remembered happier days, times when Adrian would spin her around the living room while jazz music played in the background. Those memories felt like a lifetime ago. Resolute and exhausted, she reminded herself of the life she wanted to build for her daughter, a life free from fear and uncertainty. Tensions soared as the custody hearing approached. Judge Moretti had ordered a child services evaluation to assess both parents' living conditions and emotional capacity to care for Hope. A social worker named Clara Nolan visited Elena's humble accommodations, noting the cleanliness and the bond between mother and child, despite the limited resources. A week later, Clara arrived at Adrian's penthouse, located in a prestigious building overlooking Lake Michigan. The interior was immaculate, polished marble floors, high ceilings, and unobstructed view of the city skyline. But as Clara carefully asked Adrian questions about his role as a father, his responses seemed practiced as if guided by legal coaching. Behind the scenes, Adrian struggled. On one hand, he genuinely wanted to connect with the daughter he'd only just discovered. On the other, he felt immense pressure from his family and corporate obligations. There were times he'd slip away to his private office, gazing at the paternity test results, and wondering what kind of father he could be if he barely knew how to slow down. When Clara concluded her visits, she prepared a thorough report for the court, one that would weigh heavily in determining custody arrangements. Both Elena and Adrian braced themselves, not knowing which way the scales of justice would tip. The morning of the custody hearing dawned grey and chilly, reflecting the mood that enveloped the courthouse. Journalists lined the entrance cameras, flashing with relentless curiosity. Elena felt faint, her stomach churning from a mix of nerves and residual hunger. She'd skipped breakfast, having lost her appetite. In the courtroom, Judge Moretti wasted no time. Clara Nolan's report highlighted that while Adrian could offer financial stability and a luxurious environment, he had yet to demonstrate any hands-on parenting skills. Elena, on the other hand, had been the sole caregiver, albeit in impoverished circumstances, showing unwavering devotion to the child's welfare. Marcia argued passionately that Hope deserved not just money, but emotional security. She insisted that uprooting the infant from her mother's care would be traumatic. Robert King countered, emphasizing Adrian's resources and willingness to employ the best nannies, tutors, and medical specialists. He framed it as an opportunity for Hope to flourish in ways that Elena could never provide. Judge Moretti listened carefully, his face unreadable. After hours of testimony and legal arguments, he announced that he would take the matter under advisement. The final decision would be pronounced in a week's time. Eleanor exited the courtroom with her heart pounding, wondering if she would lose the only family she had left. As the days ticked by, Elena found herself swinging between fragile hope and crushing dread. The media coverage intensified, and she even discovered online forums where people debated her life like a soap opera, some branding her a gold digger, others calling Adrian a deadbeat father. Adrian retreated into isolation. He cancelled public appearances, delegated board responsibilities, and spent long hours alone in his penthouse. Each evening, he replayed memories of Elena in his mind, the warmth of her laughter, the strength she possessed even in adversity. Guilt coiled within him, especially when he thought about how he'd cut her off without an explanation. One evening, rummaging through old photo albums, Adrian stumbled upon a note Eleanor had once slipped into his briefcase, a small letter filled with her dreams for their future. Her handwriting read, "I believe in you. I believe in us." Adrian felt tears sting his eyes. He realized, perhaps too late, that his misguided attempts to shield his inheritance and reputation had cost him the one person who believed in his better self. With renewed determination, Adrian picked up the phone and dialed Mark Henderson's number. "I want to make this right," he said quietly, feeling the weight of each syllable. "Tell me how." The next day, Marcia's phone rang. On the line was Mark Henderson proposing a private meeting between Adrian and Eleanor without the glare of the media or the influence of attorneys. Marcia hesitated, but eventually agreed, sensing that dialogue might bridge the chasm between them. Elena was skeptical. She didn't want another meeting where Adrian's lawyer waved large checks in her face. But Marcia convinced her that maybe, just maybe, Adrian had finally seen the light. So on a chilly Friday evening, under the discreet arrangement of Mark and Marcia, Eleanor took a taxi to a small cafe in an unassuming part of town. Adrian was already waiting, hunched over a table with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. He stood up the moment Elena entered, his eyes immediately darting to the infant carrier in her arms. Hope was asleep, her tiny nose peeking out from beneath a knitted pink hat. For a tense moment, neither spoke. Then in a hushed tone, Adrian broke the silence. "She's beautiful." He hesitantly reached out, brushing a gentle fingertip across Hope's tiny hand. Elena's heart constricted. In that moment, she saw not the millionaire heir, but a father astonished by his child. They sat down, words tumbling out hesitantly at first, but soon flowing. Apologies, regrets, confessions of fear and pride. Outside the wind howled, but inside that modest cafe, a fragile truce began to form. Elena left the cafe feeling as if she had just stepped off a roller coaster. She and Adrian had talked for hours about the lost months, her homelessness, the labor in an alley, his blind ambition, and the manipulative counsel of those around him. Despite her lingering anger, she couldn't deny that Adrian seemed genuine in his remorse, his eyes brimming with emotion whenever Hope made a tiny cooing sound. Though no concrete agreement was forged, they had taken a step closer to understanding. Adrian promised Elena that he would no longer hide behind the corporate fortress. If the court granted joint custody, he vowed to be a present father to ensure that Hope knew he loved her. That night, Elena returned to the shelter with Hope asleep in her arms. She felt conflicted. Her brain still cautioned her not to let her guard down, reminding her of the heartbreak she'd endured. Yet her heart yearned to believe that Adrian could be the partner and father he once promised to be. A new thought nestled into her mind. Perhaps the best scenario for Hope would be a cooperative relationship. But cooperation required trust, and trust was something they'd both shattered. For now, all she could do was wait for the court's ruling and see if Adrian's actions matched his words. On the day of the final custody decision, the tension within the courtroom was palpable. Lawyers stood at their respective tables, thick files and documents stacked high. Photographers waited outside, hungry for a shot that could capture victory or defeat. Judge Moretti took his seat, scanning the room before beginning. In the matter of Davenport versus Carter, regarding custody of the minor. "Hope Carter, I have reviewed the Child Services report, listened to both parties, and considered the best interest of the child." His voice resonated with authority. Elena clenched her hands tightly. Marcia placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Adrian sat across from them, posture rigid. The judge explained that Hope deserved the love and care of both parents, provided each demonstrated fitness and genuine commitment. To that end, Judge Moretti continued, "I am granting joint legal custody to both parties. Physical custody will remain primarily with Ms. Carter, given her demonstrated role as the primary caregiver. Mr. Davenport is granted visitation rights with a review scheduled in 6 months to determine if expanded custody is appropriate." Eleanor felt a surge of relief wash over her, tears pooling in her eyes. Adrian exhaled sharply, a complex mix of relief and resolve settling over him. The gavel's echo signaled a new chapter in their unfolding saga. In the days that followed the court's decision, Adrian took immediate steps to prove his commitment. He arranged for a modest but comfortable apartment for Eleanor and Hope, covering the lease so they no longer had to rely on the cramped quarters of the shelter. Initially, Elena resisted. She worried that accepting Adrian's help would become a new chain binding her to his will. But Marcia gently counseled that stable housing was essential for Hope's well-being, and Elena begrudgingly accepted. Still, she set boundaries. She refused to accept a personal driver or a credit card. "I want to stand on my own feet," she insisted. Adrian respected that choice, albeit with lingering concern. For Adrian, transitioning into fatherhood was humbling and at times awkward. He'd show up on weekends with groceries, baby toys, and books he was reading on how to care for infants. He took to heart every detail Elena offered: how to hold Hope correctly, how to burp her, how to recognize her different cries. Bit by bit, he caught glimpses of the daily struggles Elena endured: the midnight feedings, the diapers, the constant worry over money. With each late-night bottle he prepared, and each lullaby he learned, Adrian felt a foreign yet comforting sense of purpose awakening in him. As Hope reached 6 months old, her giggles and coos transformed the once quiet apartment into a place of joy and promise. Elena found part-time work at a local community center, helping to organize charity drives for families in need, a role that resonated deeply with her recent experiences. With Adrian's financial support for childcare, she could finally balance work and motherhood. Their co-parenting arrangement wasn't without its challenges. Adrian's demanding schedule sometimes caused him to miss scheduled visits, igniting Elena's frustration. In turn, Elena's pride often made it difficult to accept gifts or assistance beyond the bare minimum. They argued, occasionally old wounds and mistrust surfacing at the worst moments. Yet amid the strain, a growing sense of mutual respect emerged. Adrian discovered that being a father wasn't just about providing resources. It was about being present, listening to the stories of Hope's milestones, her first attempt at crawling her discovery of how to clap her hands with delight. Elena learned that she could lean on someone else without forfeiting her independence or identity. Slowly but steadily, they formed a tentative partnership focused on Hope's happiness, and in fleeting moments they caught themselves smiling at each other, recalling a lost tenderness that once bound them together. Just when things seemed to be reaching a fragile equilibrium, fate threw another curveball. A letter arrived from the Davenport family's legal team, informing Adrian that his extended family intended to challenge his ability to lead Davenport Holdings. Rumors of scandal and poor judgment swirled among board members. The story of Adrian's love child had dampened investor confidence, and certain factions within the company wanted him removed as CEO before the upcoming annual shareholder meeting. Adrian felt torn. The pressure from the board forced him into endless strategy sessions, leaving him little time for his newly formed paternal duties. Stress and sleepless nights once again plagued him. Only this time, the thought of losing his daughter's blossoming trust felt more terrifying than losing the company. Elena noticed Adrian's sudden absences, the unread texts, the last-minute cancellations. Old anxieties gnawed at her. Was he pulling away again when life became too complicated? But one night, Adrian showed up at the apartment unannounced, eyes dark with exhaustion. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "they're trying to oust me from the company. If I lose my position, I lose my standing, and with that I might lose credibility in court if custody is revisited." In that moment, Eleanor saw past his polished exterior to the vulnerable man she once loved. She felt a rush of sympathy, remembering her own struggles for survival. They were both fighting battles, each in a different arena, but connected by the same driving force, Hope's future. Determined not to let external forces tear them apart, Adrian and Elena found themselves working together in an unexpected way. While Adrian battled board politics, Elena, in her own quiet manner, stepped forward to defend him publicly. She gave a small interview to a local reporter, someone she trusted from her volunteer work, clarifying that Adrian was not the villain that tabloids painted him to be. "I won't deny our history is complicated," Elena said, cradling hope on her lap during the interview. "But Adrian Davenport has been stepping up as a father. He's learning, he's trying, and that means more to me than his net worth ever could." The interview went viral, eliciting mixed reactions. Some cynics claimed Elena had been bought off, while others admired her honesty. Yet the simple act of standing up for Adrian resonated with key investors who saw a different side of him. A man willing to own his mistakes and grow from them. As the annual shareholder meeting approached, the tension mounted. Adrian prepared presentations, gathered supportive statements, and readied a contingency plan if all else failed. At the same time, Elena braced herself for the possibility that the stability they'd just begun to enjoy might come crashing down should Adrian lose control of Davenport Holdings. The day of the shareholder meeting arrived with all the drama of a high-stakes showdown. The boardroom at Davenport Holdings was buzzing with tension. Rows of leather chairs faced a large screen, displaying financial graphs and corporate forecasts. Major investors from across the globe dialed in via video conference. Adrian presented his case, a transparent look at Davenport Holdings' performance under his leadership growth metrics and future plans. His voice was calm but firm, addressing controversies head-on. He even touched upon the paternity case, emphasizing that while the media had sensationalized his personal life, it had not impacted the company's profitability or strategic vision. Then, one by one, board members asked questions, some supportive, others accusatory. Lucinda Davenport. His stepmother led the charge to remove him, claiming he lacked the moral fiber to represent the company. Adrian countered calmly, reminding everyone that personal matters should not outweigh professional competence. In a surprising twist, Mark Henderson, Adrian's personal attorney, stood to share statements from philanthropic organizations praising Adrian's renewed commitment to social causes, some of which Elena had encouraged him to support. Slowly, the atmosphere shifted. By the time the final vote was taken, it was announced that Adrian would retain his position as CEO, winning by a narrow margin. Relief washed over him, but as he walked out of the boardroom, he knew this was only one victory in a much larger battle for redemption. That evening, Adrian arrived at Elena's apartment with a bouquet of lilies, her favorite flower. While the gesture was simple, it was the first time in months he'd shown up for a reason other than fatherly duties or crisis management. Elena welcomed him inside, noticing the weariness etched on his face. They sat in the small living room, the sound of Hope's lullaby machine humming softly from the bedroom. Adrian recounted the day's events, the tension, the accusations, the final vote. Elena listened, relieved that he'd managed to hold on to his leadership role. In the quiet that followed, she found herself reminiscing aloud about their early days, the time they tried tandem skydiving in Nevada, the quiet mornings, sipping coffee on his penthouse balcony, how he would whisper jokes just to make her laugh. Adrian smiled sadly, acknowledging how far they had strayed from those moments. A flicker of vulnerability passed between them. For Elena, it was both comforting and unsettling. She realized they were no longer the starry-eyed couple they once were. Too many harsh realities had tested their bond. Yet in that fleeting moment, the possibility of forging a new relationship built on honesty and shared responsibility didn't seem so impossible. Over the following weeks, Adrian gradually transitioned into a more present, engaged father. No longer buried beneath the avalanche of corporate obligations, he restructured his schedule, hiring trusted deputies to manage the day-to-day operations of Davenport Holdings. That decision gave him something money couldn't buy: time. And he poured that time into being with Hope. He arrived early on weekends, often surprising Elena with breakfast in hand, usually slightly cold, but the thought warmed her. Together they experienced milestones that most parents took for granted. Adrian was there when Hope giggled uncontrollably at her first bubble bath, and when she tried to crawl only to topple face first onto a plush rug. He laughed, cheered, and even cried when Hope uttered her first word. Mama Eleanor teased him for pouting, but secretly she was touched by how deeply he cared. The community center where Elena worked was preparing for its biggest event, yet a charity gala supporting homeless mothers and children. It was a cause deeply personal to her, and she'd spent months helping to organize every detail. Nervously, she handed Adrian an invitation one evening. "You don't have to come," she said quickly. "It's small, nothing like the Davenport Foundation galas you're used to." Adrian studied the invitation. "Elena, if this matters to you, it matters to me." He insisted on donating, but she was firm. "Do it anonymously. I don't want anyone to think I'm parading you around for donations." He smiled. "Then I'll show up and clap the loudest when you take the mic." At the gala, Elena wore a simple yet elegant navy blue dress borrowed from the center's donation wardrobe. She moved gracefully between guests, sharing her story without embellishing the tragedy or martyring herself. Sometimes life breaks you open so that light can get in. She told one donor, eyes briefly glancing toward Hope, sleeping in her stroller nearby. Adrian, standing at the edge of the crowd, watched her in awe. The woman he once saw only through the lens of romance had transformed into something even more formidable. An advocate, a leader, a survivor. After her speech, which ended with a standing ovation, Eleanor found Adrian waiting for her in the hallway, holding 2 cups of punch and looking slightly overwhelmed. "You were incredible," he said. "Honestly, I've never been prouder." Elena looked at him, unsure how to respond. So much had passed between them. Betrayal, distance, hardship. But in that moment, she saw none of it. She saw a man slowly shedding his armor, trying to rebuild what he had once destroyed. Later that night after the event, as they sat on Elena's couch, while Hope slept soundly in her crib, they spoke of dreams not just for their daughter, but for themselves. Not the extravagant kind from their past, but quiet, meaningful ones, starting a literacy program at the center, traveling someday with Hope, maybe even writing a children's book together. Though the future remained uncertain, the bond between them deepened, forged not through romance but resilience. And from that place, something new began to bloom. One crisp autumn afternoon, golden leaves spiraled down from the trees as Adrian took Elena and Hope on a quiet outing to the Chicago Botanic Garden. The air carried the faint scent of pine and earth, and laughter floated on the breeze from nearby families enjoying the rare sunny day. Hope, now full of energy and curiosity, sat in her stroller wide-eyed at every fluttering leaf and blooming petal, pointing and babbling in delight. Adrian pushed the stroller gently while Elena walked beside him. Their steps unhurried for the first time in a long while. The sunlight glinted through the trees, casting shifting patterns on the path. It felt almost surreal after all the months of legal battles, sleepless nights, and heartbreak, to be here in a moment so peaceful and undisturbed. They paused near a small pond where ducks drifted lazily across the surface. Adrian reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a few breadcrumbs he'd brought along. "Let's give her her first duck-feeding memory," he said, smiling as he handed a few crumbs to Elena and crouched beside Hope. The little girl squealed with glee as Adrian helped her toss them into the water. When they found a shaded bench beneath a tall oak tree, Elena sat down and leaned back, watching as Adrian continued to entertain Hope with silly faces and animated animal sounds. The bond between them had grown stronger, unmistakably genuine. Elena couldn't deny how far Adrian had come, not just in court appearances or financial responsibility, but in the daily unglamorous moments of fatherhood. Adrian eventually joined her on the bench, sitting close, but careful not to presume too much. There was a long silence before he spoke. "I've been thinking," he said, eyes fixed on Hope, playing with a leaf in her tiny hands. "About everything. How far we've come, and how far I still need to go." Elena turned her head toward him, listening intently. "I know I can't rewrite the past," he continued, "but I want to build something better for her, for us. I'm not talking about a perfect family wrapped in a bow. I know we're not there, but maybe we could try again. Not just as co-parents, but as something more." Elena felt her breath catch slightly. She looked down at their intertwined hands, remembering every low point, the alley, the courtroom, the nights when she doubted she could survive. And yet here he was, not the arrogant millionaire she had once feared, but a man learning to love with humility and care. "I don't have an answer right now," she said softly, brushing a wind-blown curl from her face. "But I'm willing to keep walking forward with you. One step at a time." Adrian nodded slowly, clearly moved. "That's all I could hope for." As the sun dipped lower and the shadows lengthened, the three of them sat in quiet harmony, watching the ducks glide across the pond. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was real. It was healing, and it was theirs. 3 months later, the sharp bite of winter had returned, but Elena Carter no longer feared the cold. She stood inside a modest but warm townhouse nestled on a quiet street in Evanston, a far cry from the shelter beds and crumbling walls of her past. The house was part of a new chapter she and Adrian had begun, one rooted not in old promises, but in careful progress. They had agreed to co-parent under one roof, not as lovers, but as partners in raising their daughter. Separate bedrooms, separate routines, but shared goals and growing respect. Hope toddled across the hardwood floor in mismatched socks, giggling as she clutched her favorite stuffed bear. Adrian sat cross-legged nearby, trying to baby-proof the bookshelf with instructions that might as well have been written in Greek. "These screws are evil," he muttered, prompting a laugh from Elena as she walked in with 2 mugs of tea. They still clashed now and then over money, over chores, over what constituted a suitable bedtime snack. But unlike before, they had learned how to listen. Arguments no longer escalated into cold silences. Instead, they ended with open conversations and quiet apologies. It was messy, imperfect, and very human. Their evenings had taken on a quiet rhythm. After Hope's bath, they'd gather in the small living room, with warm blankets and board books. Adrian had developed a flair for dramatic bedtime readings, complete with voices and sound effects that left Hope squealing with joy, and Elena smiling in spite of herself. When Hope was finally tucked into bed, the adults often lingered, sometimes talking, sometimes simply enjoying the silence that comes after a day well lived. One night, as snow flurries drifted past the window, Elena turned to Adrian and shared a new idea she'd been working on, expanding the community center's outreach to include legal aid and early childhood support. Adrian, genuinely impressed, offered to connect her with some of his philanthropic contacts, not as a favor, but as a collaborator. "You're building something powerful, Elena," he said. "It deserves the spotlight." "And you," she asked, "what are you building now?" He hesitated. I think I'm learning how to build a life, not just a legacy. Something real. Something that doesn't disappear when the cameras turn off." They exchanged a long glance full of unspoken understanding. There was no rush to define what they were neither fully reconciled nor completely apart. What mattered was the space they'd created, one of safety, of effort, of love, expressed in small daily acts. Elena often thought back to that night in the alley, shivering, terrified, alone. It had marked the beginning of the hardest chapter in her life, but it had also led her here, to warmth, to healing, to possibility. As hope stirred softly in her crib, her tiny breaths echoing through the baby monitor, Elena whispered into the quiet, "We're going to be okay." And for the first time in a long while, she truly believed it. Their journey had been anything but easy, from betrayal to legal showdowns, from lonely nights on city streets to the glaring lights of a courtroom. Yet somewhere along the way, Eleanor Carter and Adrian Davenport found a fragile strength they never knew they possessed. Through bitter truths and hard-fought compromises, they discovered that genuine love goes beyond a lavish bank account or an ironclad legal contract. It's built on presence, understanding, and an unwavering commitment to giving Hope the life she deserves. As their story continues to unfold, one truth remains clear. No matter how rocky the path, redemption and new beginnings are always possible with courage and determination. If you found inspiration or solace in this tale of resilience and the power of a parent's love, please hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories that touch the heart and awaken hope. Thank you for watching.